An expert on ACORN, Vadum has written somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 feature articles on the group and hundreds of blog posts. Author Michelle Malkin credits Vadum with being one of the 2 people in the nation for foresight and insight in reporting on the ACORN story when no one else would. Hans A. von Spakovsky is a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation Center for Legal and Judicial Studies, where he manages the Civil Justice Reform Initiative. And that project examines how state and federal courts administer civil justice, focusing on attempts by plaintiffs' attorneys and activists to manipulate the system for their own ends at the expense of the public. The Civil Justice Reform Initiative studies ways to protect and improve the system and make it more efficient, and it also seeks to bring greater fairness and predictability to the process. In addition, Mr. von Spakovsky studies the legal aspects of elections, including campaign finance, voter fraud, and voter identification laws, and issues arising from registration and equipment. His Heritage Foundation views these as important topics in an era of razor-thin victory margins for national candidates. And before joining Heritage in 2008, von Spakovsky served for 2 years as a member of the Federal Election Commission, which enforces campaign finance laws for congressional, sometimes enforces campaign finance laws for congressional and presidential elections, including public funding. And previously, before that, he had worked at the Justice Department as counsel to the Assistant General for Civil Rights, where he provided expertise and advice on enforcing the Voting Rights Act and the Help America Vote Act of 2002. And also joining us is Ms. Marcel Reid, who began her involvement in grassroots and community organizing at a very young age. At age 16, she was elected president of the Youth Advisory Committee for Compton, California. She studied under Ron Karenga, who's the founder of the Kwanzaa movement at California State University, Long Beach. Marcel later became a legal advocate for Southeast Legal Aid, where she was the liaison for 17 cities in Southeast Los Angeles County and established 2 satellite offices in Norwalk and Bell Garden, California. After marrying, Marcel moved to the East Coast and became a federal monitor for the Comprehensive Employment Training Authority, where she was responsible for 56 job sites and 450 participants in Cape May County, New Jersey. And then Marcel was transferred to New Bedford, Massachusetts, where she worked for the State Employment Office and attended the University of Massachusetts. After several more transfers, I'm assuming you're a military wife too, right, Marcel? Yes, that may account for some of the transfers. The final transfer was to Washington, D.C., where she worked in marketing for Holiday Inn Corporation, and she continued in marketing with a Cartridge Technology Network as the Director of National Corporate Relations, and she continues working in marketing today, working for a large multinational company. Marcel joined the D.C. chapter for the Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now in 1999 and became active in 2000. She rose from a member to ACORN chair in 2006, voted in unanimously by the D.C. board. She currently is chair in exile of the D.C. chapter of ACORN, which serves Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia. In this capacity, she organized and served on the National Bylaws Committee and was elected by the Board of Directors to serve on the Interim Management Committee for Organizational Development. And I guess that committee was developed following the public discovery of the $1 million embezzlement scheme that I talked about earlier by senior management of ACORN. True to her convictions of true democracy and representation and grassroots advocacy, Marcel is also chair of the ACORN 8, the People's Movement to Reform ACORN. So, as you can tell, we're blessed to have some great experts here on the issues related to ACORN, and the way this panel will go forward, we'll go in order by Matthew, Hans, and Marcel. I'll ask a few questions, keep the conversation moving, and then we'll open it up to the floor, and hopefully we can continue the conversation with our members of our audience. So that being said, I will turn over the microphone to Matthew. If you have cell phones or pagers, I've been advised you should turn them off because they will interfere with the audio equipment here. And Matthew, please.
Thanks. Thank you, Tom. I won't recount all of the allegations against ACORN because that would take several hours. But something that really hasn't been widely noticed is that ACORN received a bailout from the federal government. The Obama administration, a few weeks ago, the Department of Justice issued a legal memorandum advising the Obama administration that it could largely ignore the clear directive from Congress that ACORN was not to be funded, and it was filled with all sorts of interesting lawyerly hair-splitting. And basically, what it boils down to is that the federal government can continue funding pre-existing obligations, pre-existing commitments or contracts with ACORN, but it just can't add any new ones on. And then that was supplemented by a decision late last week by, in the Eastern District of New York, federal judge Nina Gershon ruled that she put I didn't even know judges could do this, but apparently she issued a temporary injunction forbidding Congress to stop funding ACORN, which strikes me as pretty bizarre, since I thought Congress had the power of the purse, so I thought it would be a separation of powers problem. But I'm not a lawyer or a constitutional scholar. This bailout is proceeding, and currently a bill, H.R. 3288, which is the Consolidated Appropriations Act. It's, I guess, called the Mini Omnibus Act. It's on the President's desk right now as of, I think, the 15th, and it contains the language forbidding ACORN from being funded by the federal government, but that language has already been ruled meaningless. So unless the federal government appeals the ruling, they're going to be able to continue to fund ACORN. So it's basically just business as usual between the federal government and ACORN right now. There have been many efforts to try to get ACORN probed at the congressional level, and so far they haven't been successful. There was a minority hearing by House Republicans on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, but that's not really an official hearing, an official investigation. It doesn't really count. And the greatest resistance to doing a real inquiry into ACORN has come from Congressman Gerald Nadler, the Democrat from New York. And it's not surprising that he opposes this, a proper congressional inquiry into ACORN's affairs, because he's very tightly linked to ACORN. He has been endorsed by ACORN's partisan arm in New York State. New York State has a fusion voting system, so they have minor parties that are also listed on the ballot. And New York's Working Families Party, which, as I said, is a partisan branch of ACORN, has endorsed him, and he's given it thousands, possibly tens of thousands of dollars over the years. So they have a very tight working relationship. And something, again, that very few people seem to be aware of is that he has a pretty egregious conflict of interest. He is the chairman of the Constitution Subcommittee of the House Judiciary Committee. And as such, it would be a logical starting place for a congressional investigation of ACORN to begin. But he has resisted calls so far to investigate ACORN until any substantial evidence, any credible evidence comes along. And so all those undercover videotapes don't prove anything, I guess, in his mind. But what's really terrible, in my view, is that he not only has been defending ACORN in Congress, but he has been giving legal and strategic advice to ACORN. It was reported in a Greenwich Village-based community newspaper that he had a meeting with Arthur Z. Schwartz, who is a New York City-based labor lawyer who represents ACORN in some of its legal affairs. And he said, "Why aren't you doing anything about this bill of about the bill of attainder argument?" And without boring everybody here with the civics lesson, a bill of attainder is a law by Congress that singles out a group or a person for punishment.